The girl stood at the entrance of the small family restaurant for nearly 5 minutes, gripping two metal crutches so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. One leg was real. The other was a prosthetic hidden beneath faded jeans. Her blonde hair was tied into a messy ponytail, and although she tried to look brave, her eyes revealed the truth. She was terrified of being rejected again. Across the room, a single father named Matthew Carter sat at a wooden table with his two children, 8-year-old Caleb and 4-year-old Grace. They were halfway through dinner when Matthew noticed the girl staring at their table. She took one hesitant step, then another, and finally, with a trembling voice, she asked, "Can I sit here?" Matthew looked at the empty chair beside him. Then he looked at her crutches. And what he said next would change all four of their lives forever. If you believe that kindness can give someone a second chance when the world has already given up on them, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of a miracle. The girl's name was Hannah Brooks, and she was 24 years old. 6 months earlier, she had been living a completely different life. She had worked as a graphic designer in Chicago, Illinois, had a small apartment she loved, a group of friends she trusted, and plans to travel across the country with her younger sister. She had never imagined that one rainy evening on Interstate 90 would change everything. A truck had lost control during a storm. Hannah remembered the headlights. She remembered the sound of twisting metal. She remembered waking up in a hospital room with her mother crying beside her. But the moment she remembered most clearly was when the doctor gently told her that saving her life meant amputating her left leg below the knee. At first, Hannah thought losing her leg would be the hardest part. She was wrong. The hardest part was discovering how quickly people treated her differently afterward. Some friends stopped calling because they didn't know what to say. Her boyfriend of 3 years visited twice and then disappeared completely. Her employer told her they would try to keep her position open, but 3 weeks later, she received an email explaining that the company had restructured. Hannah spent months learning to walk again. Every morning began with pain. Every evening ended with exhaustion. And every time she looked into the mirror, she struggled to recognize the woman staring back. Eventually, she decided to leave Chicago and move to Denver, Colorado, where a rehabilitation center had offered her a temporary position assisting other amputees with digital design and community programs. She didn't know anyone there. She had very little money, but she believed starting over somewhere new might hurt less than staying somewhere filled with memories. That evening, however, she had nowhere to go. The bus station had closed early because of a storm. Her phone battery was almost dead. She had spent her last $20 on transportation. And when she saw the small restaurant glowing warmly through the rain-covered windows, she had walked inside, hoping only to sit somewhere safe for a few minutes. But when people noticed her crutches, the room became uncomfortable. One couple stared. A group of teenagers whispered. A man at the counter looked away. The hostess told her every table was reserved, even though Hannah could clearly see several empty seats. She was about to leave when she noticed Matthew and his children. Their table had one empty chair. She gathered every ounce of courage she had left and asked if she could sit there. Matthew didn't hesitate. He pulled the chair out and said gently, "Of course. You don't have to ask." Hannah froze. She had expected hesitation, maybe pity, maybe an awkward smile. Instead, Matthew simply moved his daughter's coat from the chair and made room. Grace looked up at Hannah with innocent curiosity and asked if she could put Hannah's crutches against the wall so they wouldn't fall. Hannah nodded, fighting back tears. Caleb quietly moved his backpack from the floor so Hannah wouldn't trip. Matthew didn't stare at her leg. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't tell her how sorry he was. He simply treated her like a person. And somehow, that hurt more than anything, because she suddenly realized how long it had been since someone had done that. Matthew noticed her eyes filling with tears and quietly pushed a napkin across the table. Hannah whispered that she was sorry for bothering them. Matthew shook his head and told her she wasn't bothering anyone. Then he admitted something that surprised her. He said he knew what it felt like to walk into a room feeling as though everyone could see your pain. Hannah looked at him. Matthew didn't explain immediately. He glanced at his children. Their mother had died 2 years earlier from an unexpected illness. Since then, Matthew had been raising Caleb and Grace alone. He had learned how to braid Grace's hair badly. He had learned which bedtime stories Caleb secretly wanted him to read again. He had learned how to smile when he was exhausted. And he had learned that grief wasn't something you defeated. It was something you carried. He told Hannah that after his wife died, people had treated him differently too. Some friends disappeared because his sadness made them uncomfortable. Others offered advice when what he really needed was someone willing to sit beside him. Then Matthew said something Hannah would never forget. He told her, "You don't need someone to feel sorry for you. You need someone willing to save you a seat." Hannah lowered her head. The tears finally came. She covered her face, embarrassed that she was crying in front of strangers. But Grace reached across the table and gently placed a small hand on Hannah's wrist. She told her that crying was okay. Hannah smiled through her tears. For the first time in months, it was a genuine smile. The dinner continued. Caleb told Hannah about his dream of becoming a firefighter. Grace insisted on showing Hannah the drawing she had made at school. Matthew listened while Hannah slowly began telling them about her life. She told them about the accident. She told them about losing her job. She told them about the boyfriend who left. She admitted that some mornings she didn't want to get out of bed because she was tired of proving she could still live a normal life. Matthew didn't interrupt. He simply listened. When she finished, he said that maybe she didn't need to return to the life she had before the accident. Maybe she could build something new. Hannah told him she wasn't sure she had anything left to build with. Matthew looked at his children and said that sometimes the strongest houses were built from broken pieces. Those words stayed with Hannah long after dinner ended. But then the restaurant manager approached their table. He looked uncomfortable and told Hannah that the restaurant was closing. Matthew checked his phone. The rain outside had become heavier. He asked Hannah where she was staying. She hesitated. Then she admitted she had nowhere to go that night. Matthew immediately stood. He told her that there was a small guest room at his home and that she could stay there for the night. Hannah's eyes widened. She refused at first. She said she didn't want to be a burden. Matthew told her she wasn't. He explained that his house had an extra room because his wife had once planned to turn it into an art studio, but after her death, he had never found the strength to finish it. He told Hannah she could stay there until she figured out her next step. Hannah stared at him as though he had offered her something far more valuable than a room. He had offered her dignity. That night, Matthew drove Hannah to his modest home in the suburbs of Denver. The house wasn't luxurious. There were children's toys on the stairs, drawings taped to the refrigerator, and laundry sitting in a basket that Matthew clearly hadn't had time to fold. But when Hannah entered the guest room, she found fresh sheets, a glass of water, and a handwritten note from Grace placed on the pillow. It said, "You are safe here." Hannah sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not because she was sad. Because for the first time since the accident, she felt safe. The next morning, she woke up to the smell of pancakes. She slowly opened the door and found Caleb in the kitchen trying to flip a pancake, while Matthew desperately tried to stop him from burning it. Grace saw Hannah and shouted that breakfast was ready. Hannah laughed. It was the first morning in months that she had laughed before remembering her pain. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Hannah didn't simply stay with Matthew. She became part of their little family. She helped Caleb with his art projects. She taught Grace how to draw flowers. Matthew helped Hannah search for work. When she became frustrated, he reminded her that rejection didn't mean she had no value. When her prosthetic caused pain, he drove her to appointments. When she struggled to walk outside because strangers stared, Matthew walked beside her without saying a word. Slowly, Hannah began rebuilding herself. Then one afternoon, Matthew received a phone call from a local design company. They had seen Hannah's portfolio. They wanted to interview her. Hannah nearly declined. She was afraid. Afraid they would see her prosthetic. Afraid they would judge her. Afraid they would reject her again. Matthew told her that courage didn't mean being unafraid. It meant walking forward while afraid. So Hannah went. She got the job. Her first paycheck wasn't huge. But when she held it in her hands, she cried. Not because of the money, because it proved she could still build something. Months passed. Hannah moved into a small apartment nearby. She bought her own furniture. She decorated the walls. She learned to walk confidently with her prosthetic. And every Sunday, she still came to Matthew's house for dinner. One Sunday evening, however, Matthew received an envelope. It contained medical bills from an old debt he had been struggling to pay. He sat silently at the kitchen table after the children went to bed. Hannah noticed. She asked what was wrong. Matthew tried to hide it. But eventually he admitted that he was considering selling the house. Hannah remembered everything he had done for her. The empty chair, the guest room, the pancakes, the countless rides to appointments. the words that had helped her believe in herself again. And she realized something. Matthew had saved her when she had nothing. Now it was her turn. Hannah contacted people from her new workplace. She discovered that a major nonprofit organization was searching for a designer to lead an accessibility campaign. She recommended Matthew's story and her own experience. Within weeks, the project became one of the largest community campaigns in Colorado. Hannah was hired to lead it. But she didn't stop there. She convinced the organization to create a special fund to help families struggling with medical expenses and people adjusting to life after disability. Matthew's debt was eventually covered through the program. He kept his house. But the greatest change wasn't financial. It was emotional. One evening, nearly a year after Hannah had first entered that restaurant, Matthew took his children back there. Hannah was already sitting at their usual table. This time, there was an empty chair beside her. Matthew smiled. He asked if he could sit there. Hannah laughed and told him that he didn't need to ask. Grace climbed onto the seat beside Hannah. Caleb placed his backpack under the table. And for a moment, nobody spoke. They simply sat together. The same restaurant, the same wooden table, but completely different people. Hannah looked toward the entrance and remembered the frightened young woman who had once stood there gripping her crutches, convinced that nobody wanted her around. Then she looked at Matthew. He had not rescued her with money. He hadn't performed some impossible miracle. He had done something much simpler. He had made room. Sometimes, that's all a broken heart needs. Not a lecture. Not pity. Not someone promising that everything will magically become perfect. Just one person saying, "You can sit here." Hannah's eyes filled with tears again. Matthew noticed and smiled. She told him that his kindness had saved her life. Matthew shook his head and said that she had saved herself. Hannah disagreed. She told him that maybe she had taken the steps, but he had reminded her where to walk. And that was when Matthew finally understood that the empty chair at that restaurant had never really been about a chair. It had been about belonging, about dignity, about giving someone a reason to believe they still mattered. Years later, Hannah would become an advocate for people with disabilities across the United States. She would speak at schools, hospitals, and community centers. Whenever someone asked her what changed her life, she never mentioned the accident first. She always talked about a wooden table in a little restaurant in Denver. She talked about a single father and 2 children. And she talked about an empty chair. She would tell people that sometimes life takes something from you that you never believed you could live without. But that doesn't mean your story is over. Sometimes, the worst chapter is simply the page before everything changes. And sometimes, your miracle doesn't arrive with flashing lights or millions of dollars. Sometimes, it arrives as a stranger pulling out a chair. Sometimes, it looks like a child offering you a crayon drawing. Sometimes, it sounds like a tired father saying, "You don't have to ask." And sometimes, kindness doesn't just make someone feel better. Sometimes, kindness gives them the courage to begin again. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so more stories like this can reach people who may be quietly struggling today. You never know when one small act of kindness might become the reason someone chooses not to give up. And before the story ends, I have one special request. Comment, "Save a seat," below if you believe everyone deserves a place where they feel accepted, respected, and loved. Because somewhere out there, someone may be standing at the door right now, afraid to ask for a place at the table. And maybe what they need isn't a miracle. Maybe they just need someone to look up, move over, and say, "Of course, sit here."